Imagine a country once filled with hope, a place where people believed they could carve out a brighter future. That was Burkina Faso. For years, it was led by Blaise Compaoré, a man who kept a firm grip on power. To some, he was a symbol of stability. To others, his rule felt suffocating as he relied on strict control to stay in charge. Then came 2014, and everything flipped. The people of Burkina Faso had reached their breaking point. Crowds filled the streets, their voices rising in unison against Compaoré's plans to change the rules and extend his time in office. They weren't just angry, they were determined to reclaim their future, and they succeeded. Compaoré stepped down, leaving behind a nation ready to start fresh. For a moment, it seemed like a new chapter was about to begin. A transitional government took over, and there was real excitement about the possibility of free elections, something the people hadn't seen in years. But just when things were looking up, disaster struck. Out of nowhere, a group of soldiers, still loyal to the old regime, tried to seize power in a coup. Their plan? Stop the elections, dismantle the progress, and turn back the clock to Compaoré's era. It was a brazen move, and it threatened to undo everything the people had fought so hard to achieve. But the people of Burkina Faso weren't having it. Once again, they took to the streets. Their message was loud and clear. They would not let their hard-earned freedom slip away. Even the military began to fracture as some soldiers turned against the coup plotters. In just a few days, the uprising was defeated, and the transitional government regained control. Still, the failed coup left deep scars. It wasn't just about the immediate danger, it raised tough questions. Could the country truly move forward after this? How could leaders ensure that democracy took root without constant threats of unrest? Fast forward to 2025, and Burkina Faso faced yet another crossroads. The government made a shocking announcement. It would offer amnesty to those who had been involved in the coup. The decision sent shockwaves through the country and beyond. Why would they forgive the very people who tried to derail their progress? But the scars left by the coup ran deeper than anyone could see. It wasn't just about the chaos in the streets or the disruptions to daily life. It was about trust in the system, trust in leadership, and trust in the idea that the people's voices could truly shape their future. The coup had ripped open old wounds, exposing deep-seated tensions that many had hoped were fading away. It was a stark reminder of how delicate Burkina Faso's journey toward democracy really was. For the new government, the stakes couldn't have been higher. They were walking a tightrope, balancing the need for justice with the need to keep the fragile peace intact. What do you do with those who tried to tear everything apart? Punishing them might satisfy calls for justice, but could risk further unrest. Forgiving them, on the other hand, might look like a betrayal of everything the people had fought for. It was a no-win situation. But one thing was clear. The country couldn't afford to stay stuck in the past. Decisions had to be made, and they had to be made fast. Burkina Faso was at a crossroads. The country had been through so much. Years of dictatorship, a revolution, and then a coup that threatened to tear everything apart. Stability wasn't just a want. It was a desperate need. But how do you move forward when the wounds of the past are still fresh? Some might say, why not just forget what happened and move on? Sounds simple, right? But here's the thing. What happened in 2015 wasn't just a blip on the radar. It wasn't something you could sweep under the rug. It was a moment that could have changed everything. Let's rewind. In 2014, the people of Burkina Faso stood up and said, enough is enough. They pushed out Blaise Compaoré, a man who had been in charge for decades. It was a historic victory. And for the first time in years, the country felt like it was on the brink of real change. Free elections were on the horizon, and people dared to dream of a democratic future. Then came the coup. A group of soldiers, loyal to the old regime, decided they weren't ready to let go of the power they'd enjoyed for so long. It wasn't just about who was in charge, it was a battle for the soul of the nation. The timing couldn't have been worse. The country was just starting to recover from decades of authoritarian rule. If the coup had succeeded, it would have thrown Burkina Faso into chaos, undoing years of progress and plunging the country back into political darkness. The stakes were enormous. But the coup didn't just shake up politics, it exposed something deeper. The country was divided, not just between pro-democracy advocates and Compaoré loyalists, but in ways that touched every part of society. These divisions weren't just political, they were personal. Families, communities, even parts of the military were split over what direction the country should take. It was like opening an old wound and realizing it hadn't healed. If you are still watching this video, it means you love it. Why not take out a minute and hit that like button? Have you done that? Let us continue. So, when the government finally regained control, they were left with a massive question. What now? How do you move forward when your country is so fractured? How do you build trust in a system that was almost destroyed? This is where things get complicated. The government made a bold and controversial decision. They decided to offer amnesty to the very people who had tried to overthrow the system. It wasn't a decision everyone agreed with. Some called it an act of mercy. Others called it a betrayal. Why would they do this? Well, Burkina Faso was in a fragile state. The coup had revealed just how precarious things really were. Many people still supported the old regime, and punishing those involved in the coup could have sparked even more violence. The country couldn't afford to spiral into another cycle of unrest. The amnesty wasn't about excusing what happened. It was about trying to ensure it didn't happen again. By forgiving, the government hoped to create space for reconciliation. It was an attempt to focus on the future, rather than letting the country remain stuck in the bitterness of the past. It was a gamble, one that carried enormous risks. Would it bring healing, or would it send the message that you could try to destroy democracy and get away with it? The decision to offer amnesty wasn't as simple as forgive and forget. Far from it. The government wasn't handing out a free pass or letting anyone off the hook. This was about accountability, but with a twist. The soldiers involved in the coup had to own up to what they did, and it wasn't just about saying sorry and moving on. They had to step up and prove they could contribute to something bigger than themselves, the country's survival. First, they were required to publicly admit their roles in the chaos. No hiding, no excuses. Imagine standing in front of a nation and saying, "Yes, I was part of this." That's no small thing. But admission alone wasn't enough. The second condition was a game changer. They had to join the fight against insurgents threatening the country's stability. These weren't hollow promises. They were a commitment to help heal the very nation they had tried to destabilize. Critics weren't shy about speaking out. To many, it felt like justice was being sacrificed for the sake of convenience. They worried it sent the wrong message, that you could get away with treason if you played your cards right. The government saw things differently. They believed reconciliation was the only way forward. Burkina Faso couldn't afford to remain a house divided, especially not with insurgent groups gaining strength in the region. The amnesty law wasn't about letting anyone off the hook. It was about finding a way to unite the country against a common enemy. But how did this amnesty law actually work? It wasn't a simple, "you're forgiven, go home" situation. It had teeth. To qualify, soldiers had to meet two non-negotiable conditions. First, they had to admit exactly what they'd done during the coup. No vague statements, no dodging responsibility. They had to come clean. Second, they had to commit to actively helping the government tackle the growing threat of armed insurgencies. In short, amnesty wasn't just a pardon, it was a pact. For Burkina Faso, these conditions were critical. The country was facing an increasing number of attacks, and the government needed all hands on deck, even those hands that had once tried to overthrow it. This wasn't about erasing the past. It was about securing the future. The idea was simple. If these soldiers could redirect their loyalty and skills toward defending the nation, they could become part of the solution instead of remaining symbols of the problem. Still, the plan came with its share of risks. How could the government ensure these soldiers wouldn't betray their promises? What if amnesty became a loophole for avoiding accountability? These questions loomed large, and they weren't easy to answer. Forgiveness, in this case, wasn't a clean slate. It was a challenge to rise above past mistakes. And for the soldiers, amnesty wasn't the get-out-of-jail-free card it might seem. Yes, it meant they wouldn't face legal consequences for their actions. They could return to their communities without fear of prison. But this wasn't about escaping justice. It was about earning redemption. By agreeing to the terms, they weren't just avoiding punishment, they were taking on a new responsibility. Amnesty gave these soldiers a chance to prove they were more than their past actions. It wasn't just about making peace with the government, it was about showing the people of Burkina Faso that they were ready to protect the country they'd once put at risk. It was a second chance, but it came with strings attached. Those strings weren't just about accountability, they were about responsibility. Imagine being given a second chance, not just to right your wrongs, but to help rebuild something you once tried to tear down. That's exactly the deal the soldiers involved in Burkina Faso's 2015 coup were offered. But this wasn't a free ticket to redemption. They had to earn it. For these soldiers, the amnesty wasn't just an escape hatch from the consequences of their actions. It was a challenge. Think about it. These were the same people who had once jeopardized Burkina Faso's fragile democracy. Now, they were being asked to help protect it. In return for forgiveness, they had to prove their loyalty not just to the government, but to the people whose trust they'd shattered. But was this fair? Some argued it wasn't. Forgiveness on this scale felt controversial. How do you forgive someone who tried to destroy everything you fought for? Critics asked. Doesn't this just let them off the hook? For the government, though, the decision wasn't about letting anyone off easy. It was about survival, both for the country's democracy and for its people. After decades of dictatorship and political chaos, Burkina Faso had finally started moving towards something better. The coup had been a wake-up call, showing just how delicate that progress was. If the government didn't act decisively, the divisions created by the coup could drag the country backward, undoing years of hard-won change. So, the leaders made a bold choice. offer amnesty as a way to heal and move forward. This wasn't just about forgiving individuals, it was about creating a roadmap for peace and unity. The idea was simple in theory, but tricky in execution. Could soldiers who had once fought against the system now be trusted to protect it? Could amnesty really bring people together? Or would it spark even more resentment? To make this work, the government set clear conditions for those seeking amnesty. First, the soldiers had to admit what they'd done. This wasn't about sweeping things under the rug or pretending the coup hadn't happened. It was about owning up to their actions and acknowledging the harm they caused. Only by facing the truth could they begin to rebuild trust with the people they'd betrayed. Burkina Faso was under pressure, facing increasing violence from extremist factions. The government needed all the help it could get, even if that help came from former enemies. This wasn't just a symbolic gesture. By tying amnesty to active participation in the fight for national security, the government was sending a message. Forgiveness wasn't a gift, it was an opportunity. And with that opportunity came responsibility. These soldiers had to prove they could be part of the solution, not just remnants of the problem. Still, the decision came with risks. Could the soldiers be trusted to follow through? What if amnesty turned into a revolving door where bad actors were forgiven only to cause more trouble later? These were questions the government had to grapple with as they moved forward. Burkina Faso, like many countries in the Sahel, has been battling an alarming rise in insurgent attacks. Armed groups continue to threaten the region's stability, making it a dangerous time for the country to be divided. This made the government's decision to offer amnesty to soldiers involved in the 2015 coup not just bold, but absolutely critical. This wasn't just about patching up old wounds, it was about survival. For the government, the stakes were clear. Forgiving alone wasn't enough. These soldiers needed to actively work toward rebuilding the country they had once nearly torn apart. The government laid down strict conditions. Those seeking amnesty had to take responsibility for their actions during the coup. They had to step forward, acknowledge the harm they'd caused, and commit to a new path. More importantly, they had to promise to join the fight against the insurgents threatening Burkina Faso's future. This was a chance to prove they could contribute to the country's stability, not its destruction. In many ways, this was as much a practical decision as it was a moral one. Burkina Faso couldn't afford endless cycles of political revenge while facing external threats. The government knew it had to unite its people, including those who had once been adversaries, if it wanted to stand a chance at long-term peace and security. But what does this mean for the future? This amnesty has sparked heated debate across the country. Supporters believe it's a step in the right direction, a way to break the cycle of violence and work toward unity. They argue that the only way forward is together, and that holding on to grudges will only keep the country stuck in the past. For them, it's about moving forward, not backward. On the other side, critics have raised serious concerns. They worry that forgiving the soldiers might send the wrong message, that trying to overthrow a government comes with little consequence. What's stopping this from happening again? They ask. For these critics, justice feels like it's been sacrificed for the sake of convenience. This decision is a gamble. If the soldiers follow through on their commitments, the amnesty could help bring the country closer together. It could even strengthen Burkina Faso's ability to face the growing threats from insurgent groups. But if the soldiers fail to uphold their promises or use the amnesty as an escape, it could deepen divisions and lead to more instability. The people of Burkina Faso are watching closely. This is more than just a political move. It's a test of whether the country can truly heal and build something stronger from its fractured past. What do you think? Can forgiveness pave the way for peace, or does it risk letting dangerous precedents take root? Let us know what you think in the comments below. Did you find this video interesting? Do you think Traore did the right thing by freeing these soldiers?